The first snowflake that touched Isaac Hendrick's cheek felt like a warning. But by the time he realized the storm was coming in earnest, the world had already turned white around him. He had been traveling for 3 days through the northern wilderness, following a trader's route that was supposed to lead him to a settlement where he could find work for the winter. The war had ended 6 months ago, and Isaac had returned to find his family's farm sold off for debt. His younger sister married and moved away, and nothing waiting for him but memories of a life that no longer existed. So he had packed what little he owned and headed north, where they said a man willing to work hard could carve out a new beginning. Now, as the wind picked up and the snow began to fall in thick, heavy sheets, Isaac realized he might not live long enough to find that new beginning. The temperature was dropping rapidly, and the path ahead had become impossible to distinguish from the forest floor. His fingers were already numb inside his gloves, and his boots were soaked through from trudging through increasingly deep drifts. He needed shelter, and he needed it soon. Through the swirling white chaos, Isaac spotted a dark shape ahead. At first he thought it might be a rock formation, but as he stumbled closer, squinting against the wind, he realized it was a structure. A cabin, small and sturdy-looking, built from rough-hewn logs with a stone chimney rising from one end. No smoke came from the chimney, but the building looked solid and well-maintained. Isaac approached the door and pounded on it with his fist, calling out to see if anyone was home. The wind howled in response, nearly knocking him off his feet. He tried the handle and found it locked. He pounded again, harder this time, desperation creeping into his voice as he shouted. No answer came. He was considering whether he could break a window when he heard the sound of a bolt being drawn back. The door opened a crack, and Isaac found himself staring at a face he had not expected to see: green skin, yellow eyes that caught the dim light like a cat's, small tusks protruding from a strong jaw, pointed ears visible beneath a thick braid of dark hair. An orc. Isaac had seen orcs before during the war. He had fought against them, watched his friends die at their hands, and killed more than a few himself. The sight of one now in this isolated place sent a jolt of old instincts through him. His hand moved automatically toward the knife at his belt, but the orc woman did not attack. She simply looked at him with those strange yellow eyes, her expression unreadable, and said nothing. "Please," Isaac managed, his teeth chattering. "The storm. I need shelter. I will freeze out here." The orc woman's eyes moved past him, taking in the blizzard that was rapidly becoming a white wall behind him. She hesitated for a long moment, and Isaac could see the conflict playing across her features. Then, with what looked like reluctance, she stepped back and opened the door wider. Isaac stumbled inside, and she closed the door behind him, throwing the bolt back into place. The interior of the cabin was dim, lit only by the gray light filtering through 2 small windows. It was a single large room, with a sleeping area partitioned off by a curtain at one end, a cooking area with a stone hearth at the other, and a simple living space in between. The furniture was minimal but well crafted. A sturdy table with 2 chairs, shelves holding supplies and equipment, hooks on the walls for hanging clothes and tools. Everything was neat and organized, with none of the clutter Isaac associated with most frontier homes. The orc woman had already turned away from him and was moving toward the hearth. She knelt and began building a fire, her movements quick and efficient. Within minutes, flames were crackling in the hearth, and warmth was beginning to spread through the room. Isaac stood by the door, dripping melting snow onto the floor, unsure what to do. This was not at all what he had expected. He had heard stories of orcs living in the wilderness, raiding human settlements or gathering in war bands. He had never heard of one living alone in a cabin like a human homesteader. "Thank you," he said finally. "I am Isaac. Isaac Hendrick." The orc woman glanced at him but did not reply. She stood and moved to one of the shelves, pulling down a length of cloth. She held it out to him without speaking, and Isaac realized she meant for him to dry himself off. He took the cloth, murmuring another thanks, and began rubbing the snow from his hair and face. His hands were shaking, whether from cold or from the strangeness of the situation, he could not say. "What is your name?" he asked, trying again. The orc woman had returned to the fire and was adjusting the logs. For a moment, Isaac thought she was not going to answer. Then, in a voice that was low and rough, as if she did not use it often, she said, "Lyra. Lyra Longtusk." "Lyra," Isaac repeated. "Thank you for letting me in. I know this must be strange for you. It is strange for me too." Lyra did not respond to that. She stood and moved past him to a chest against one wall from which she pulled a heavy blanket. She held it out to him the same way she had held out the cloth, without meeting his eyes. Isaac took it and wrapped it around his shoulders. The warmth was heavenly, and he felt some of the tension leave his body. But he was still aware of how careful Lyra was not to come too close to him, and how she kept her body positioned so she could see both him and the door at all times. She did not trust him, and he supposed he could not blame her for that. "How long do you think the storm will last?" he asked. Lyra moved to one of the windows and looked out at the swirling white. When she spoke, her voice was flat and matter-of-fact. 3 days, maybe 4. The blizzards here last." Isaac felt his stomach sink. 3 or 4 days trapped in this small cabin with an orc stranger. 3 or 4 days during which they would have to coexist in this space, sharing resources, navigating the tension and distrust that lay between their two peoples like a chasm. "I have some food in my pack," he offered. "Not much, but I can contribute." Lyra's eyes flicked to the pack he had dropped by the door, then back to his face. She nodded once, a brief acknowledgement, but said nothing. The silence that followed was uncomfortable. Isaac moved closer to the fire, grateful for the warmth but acutely aware of how every movement seemed to make Lyra tense. She had positioned herself near the cooking area, keeping the table between them, and was watching him with the wariness of a wild animal deciding whether to flee or fight. Isaac decided to sit down on the floor near the fire, making himself as non-threatening as possible. He kept his hands visible and his movements slow and deliberate. After a moment, Lyra seemed to relax slightly, though she did not lower her guard. Outside, the wind howled like a living thing, and the snow battered against the walls. Inside, the fire crackled and popped, and two people who had every reason to be enemies sat in wary silence, bound together by the storm. As the afternoon wore into evening, Lyra began to prepare food. She worked with quiet efficiency, pulling supplies from various storage places around the cabin. Isaac watched her, noting the way she moved with a kind of economical grace, wasting no motion. She had the build of someone who worked hard every day, her shoulders broad and her arms muscled beneath the worn tunic she wore. She prepared a simple stew, using dried meat and preserved vegetables. The smell of it cooking made Isaac's stomach growl audibly, reminding him that he had not eaten since morning. Lyra glanced at him when she heard it, and for just a moment, something that might have been amusement flickered in her eyes. When the stew was ready, she ladled it into 2 wooden bowls and placed one on the table, along with a spoon. Then she took her own bowl and moved to sit on the floor on the opposite side of the room, as far from Isaac as she could get while still being near the fire. Isaac understood the message. They would share space and food because they had to, but that did not mean she wanted him close to her. He sat at the table and ate, and the stew was surprisingly good. The meat was tender and well seasoned, the vegetables cooked perfectly. Whoever Lyra Longtusk was, she knew how to cook. "This is excellent," he said. "Thank you." Lyra did not respond, but she glanced up at him briefly before returning her attention to her food. They ate in silence, and when the meal was done, Lyra collected both bowls and washed them in a bucket of water near the door. Then she pulled the curtain aside and disappeared into the sleeping area. She emerged a moment later with a rolled-up bedroll, which she tossed toward Isaac. It landed on the floor near his feet. "You sleep there," she said, pointing to a spot near the fire but well away from the sleeping area. "Do not come past the curtain." "I would not," Isaac said quickly. "I promise you, I mean you no harm." Lyra studied him for a long moment, her yellow eyes unreadable. Then she nodded once and retreated behind the curtain, pulling it closed with a decisive snap. Isaac unrolled the bedroll and spread it out where she had indicated. It was well made and thick, clearly meant for cold weather. He lay down on it, still wrapped in the blanket she had given him, and stared up at the ceiling beams. The fire cast dancing shadows on the walls, and outside the storm raged on. Isaac listened to the wind and thought about the strange turn his life had taken. A week ago, he could never have imagined he would be sheltering from a blizzard in an orc's cabin, eating her food and sleeping on her floor. The war had taught him many things, but one of the most important was that orcs were dangerous, violent, and not to be trusted. Every soldier he had served with believed that without question. And yet here was Lyra Longtusk, living alone in the wilderness, keeping a tidy home, cooking good food, and showing mercy to a human stranger who appeared at her door. It did not fit with what he had been taught, and that troubled him more than he wanted to admit. He must have fallen asleep eventually, because the next thing he knew, he was waking to gray morning light filtering through the windows. The fire had burned down to embers, and the cabin was cold. Isaac sat up, rubbing his eyes, and saw that the curtain to the sleeping area was already pulled back, and Lyra was nowhere to be seen. Then he heard sounds from outside. He got up and moved to one of the windows, peering through the frost-covered glass. The snow had piled up against the cabin walls overnight, drifts reaching nearly to the window ledges. The storm was still going strong, the wind driving snow horizontally through the air in sheets. And in the middle of this chaos, Isaac could see a figure moving near a structure he had not noticed the night before. A small lean-to shelter attached to the back of the cabin. Lyra. She was wearing a heavy coat and had a scarf wrapped around her face, but her distinctive shape was unmistakable. She was carrying an armload of firewood from the shelter back toward the cabin. Isaac quickly pulled on his own coat and boots and went to the door. He unbolted it and pushed, but the snow had drifted against it, and it only opened a few inches. He put his shoulder against it and shoved hard, managing to widen the gap enough to squeeze through. The cold hit him like a physical blow. The wind was fierce, stealing his breath and making his eyes water. He could barely see Lyra through the swirling snow, but he pushed toward her, fighting his way through the drifts. "Let me help," he shouted over the wind. Lyra turned, clearly surprised to see him. She opened her mouth as if to refuse, then seemed to think better of it and nodded toward the lean-to. They made several trips together, carrying wood back to the cabin and stacking it inside near the hearth. It was hard, exhausting work, the cold biting through their clothes and the wind constantly threatening to knock them off their feet. But they worked in tandem, falling into a rhythm without needing to speak. When they finally got back inside and bolted the door against the storm, both of them were covered in snow and breathing hard. Lyra immediately set about building up the fire, and soon warmth was spreading through the cabin again. Isaac stripped off his wet coat and hung it on one of the hooks, then did the same with his gloves. When he turned around, he found Lyra watching him. There was something different in her expression now, a slight softening of the wariness. "You did not have to do that," she said. Her voice was still rough and low, but there was less hostility in it than before. "I could not let you do all the work yourself," Isaac replied. "It is your home, but I am eating your food and using your shelter. The least I can do is help." Lyra turned back to the fire, but not before Isaac saw what might have been approval in her eyes. They spent the rest of that day much as they had spent the previous evening. In silence, occupying different parts of the small cabin, carefully staying out of each other's way. But the silence felt less strained now, less charged with suspicion. They had worked together, and that simple act had changed something. In the afternoon, Lyra pulled out a basket of what looked like mending and set to work repairing a torn shirt. Isaac watched her for a while, noting the way her large hands moved with surprising delicacy as she worked the needle through the fabric. Her tusks, which he had initially seen as weapons or marks of savagery, were actually quite small and seemed to curve gently from her lower jaw. They did not make her look monstrous. They were just part of her face as much as her broad nose or high cheekbones. "You have any mending you need done?" Lyra asked suddenly, startling him from his thoughts. Isaac blinked. Yes, actually. My spare shirt has a tear in the shoulder. But I can do it myself. I do not want to impose." "You cannot so," Lyra said flatly. It was not a question. Isaac felt his face heat. "Not well," he admitted. "My sister tried to teach me, but I was never very good at it." Lyra held out her hand. "Show me." Isaac retrieved his pack and pulled out the shirt. The tear was substantial, running several inches across the shoulder seam. He had been meaning to have it repaired for weeks, but had never found the opportunity. Lyra examined it, then nodded and added it to her basket. She did not say anything else, just bent her head and began working on it. Isaac felt oddly moved by the gesture. It was such a simple thing, mending a shirt, but it felt like an offering of sorts, a small bridge across the gulf between them. "Thank you," he said quietly. Lyra glanced up at him briefly, and he thought he saw the corner of her mouth twitch. Not quite a smile, but something close. As the evening drew in, they prepared and ate another meal together. This time, Isaac helped with the preparation, chopping vegetables under Lyra's watchful eye. She did not comment on his technique, but she did move his pile of chopped vegetables to a different pot than the one she was using, which told him everything he needed to know about the quality of his work. That night, as Isaac lay on his bedroll by the fire, he found himself thinking about the orc woman sleeping on the other side of the curtain. She had shown him kindness, despite having every reason not to. She had fed him, sheltered him, mended his clothing, and she had asked for nothing in return. Who was Lyra Longtusk? Why was she living out here alone? What had brought her to this isolated place, so far from any orc settlements he had heard of? Isaac realized he wanted to know the answers to those questions. And more than that, he realized he was starting to feel comfortable here, in this small cabin, sharing space with someone who should have been his enemy. It was a strange and unsettling feeling, but not an entirely unpleasant one. The second day of the storm followed much the same pattern as the first. They woke, tended the fire, brought in more wood together, ate, and then occupied themselves with small tasks around the cabin. But the silence between them was becoming more companionable, and Isaac noticed that Lyra was no longer quite so careful to keep distance between them. She still watched him, but with curiosity now rather than pure suspicion. In the afternoon, Isaac noticed that one of the shutters on the windows was loose, banging against the wall every time the wind gusted. He mentioned it to Lyra, and she frowned and went to examine it. "The hinge is pulling free," she said, tugging at it experimentally. I have been meaning to fix it, but I have not had time. I can do it, Isaac offered, if you have tools. Lyra looked at him skeptically. You know how to do that kind of work? I grew up on a farm, Isaac said. I know my way around basic repairs. After a moment's hesitation, Lyra retrieved a small box of tools from a shelf and handed it to him. Isaac set to work, removing the loose hinge and examining it. The screw holes had become worn and enlarged, so he found some small wooden shims and wedged them into the holes before reattaching the hinge. It was not a perfect repair, but it was solid, and the shutter no longer rattled. Lyra tested it, pulling the shutter open and closed several times. Then she looked at him with what was unmistakably respect. That is good work. Isaac felt an absurd amount of pleasure at the simple compliment. Thank you. If you have other repairs that need doing, I would be happy to help. There are always repairs, Lyra said, and this time there was definitely the hint of a smile on her face. That evening, as they sat by the fire after dinner, Isaac decided to take a chance. Can I ask you something? Lyra looked up from the piece of leather she was treating with oil. You can ask, I may not answer. Fair enough. Isaac paused, choosing his words carefully. How long have you lived here? Lyra was quiet for a long moment, her hands stilling in their work. Isaac thought she was not going to answer. Then she said, 2 years, a little more. Do you live here alone? By choice? Another long pause. Then, yes, by choice, and because I had no other choice. Isaac frowned at the seemingly contradictory statement, but before he could ask for clarification, Lyra spoke again. I was part of a clan, she said, her voice low and carefully controlled. The Longtusk clan in the mountains to the east. When the war ended, many humans wanted revenge for what had been done to them. They raided our settlements, killed our people. My clan decided to fight back. They said we should strike first, attack human villages before we were attacked. She paused, her hands tightening on the leather. I disagreed. I said the war was over and more killing would only bring more death, that we should seek peace, not revenge. She looked up at Isaac, and her yellow eyes were hard. They called me a coward, a traitor. They said I had become weak, that I had forgotten what it meant to be an orc, so they exiled me. Told me to go live with the humans if I loved them so much. Isaac felt a knot forming in his chest. I am sorry. That must have been difficult. Lyra shrugged, a sharp, dismissive gesture. I made my choice. I do not regret it, but I could not go to human settlements either. Your people hate and fear my kind. They would have killed me on sight or driven me away. So I came here where no one would bother me, where I could live in peace. Until I showed up at your door, Isaac said quietly. Until you showed up at my door, Lyra agreed. She returned her attention to the leather, her movements sharp and precise. I almost did not let you in. I thought you might kill me once you recovered from the cold. Or that you would leave and tell others about me and they would come to drive me away. I would not do that, Isaac said firmly. Either of those things. You saved my life. I will not repay that with betrayal. Lyra studied him for a long moment. Why should I believe you? You are human. You fought in the war. You have killed orcs. Isaac could not deny it. Yes, I have. And orcs killed many humans, including people I cared about, friends I grew up with, a cousin who was like a brother to me. He took a breath. I will not lie and say I did not hate your people during the war. I did. It was easy to hate when all I saw was violence and death. And now, Lyra asked, her voice sharp, now I am sitting in your home, eating food you prepared, wearing a shirt you mended, and realizing that everything I thought I knew might have been incomplete. Isaac met her eyes steadily. You are not what I expected, Lyra Longtusk, and I am grateful for that. Lyra's expression softened slightly. She looked away, back down at her work, but Isaac thought he saw the tension leave her shoulders. They did not speak again that night, but something had shifted between them. A beginning of understanding, fragile but real. On the third day, the storm showed no signs of letting up. If anything, it seemed to have intensified, the wind howling even louder and the snow piling even higher against the cabin walls. Isaac and Lyra went out together to bring in more wood, leaning against each other for support as they fought their way through the drifts. When they came back inside, Lyra pulled off her scarf and shook the snow from her hair, and Isaac found himself noticing details he had not paid attention to before. The way her dark hair caught the firelight when it was loose, the strength in her jaw and the intelligence in her eyes. The way she moved with confidence and purpose, comfortable in her own skin despite the hardships she had endured. She was, he realized with some surprise, beautiful. Not in the conventional way human women were beautiful, but in her own way. Strong and solid and real. Lyra caught him looking and raised an eyebrow. What? Isaac felt his face heat. Nothing, just thinking. Dangerous activity, Lyra said dryly, but there was amusement in her eyes. As they warmed themselves by the fire, Isaac said, "Tell me about this place." "How did you build all this by yourself?" Lyra glanced around the cabin as if seeing it for the first time. "I did not build it alone. There was an old human trapper who lived here before me. He had died the winter before I arrived. I found his body in the sleeping area, frozen. I buried him in the spring when the ground thawed." Isaac felt a chill that had nothing to do with the cold. That must have been hard. "It was practical," Lyra said with a shrug. "He no longer needed the cabin. I did. I have maintained it, made improvements. Added the lean-to for storage. Repaired the chimney. It is a good home." "It is," Isaac agreed. "You have done well here." Lyra looked at him, and for the first time she seemed genuinely pleased. "It is strange to hear someone say that. I have not spoken to another person in months. Sometimes I forget what my own voice sounds like." The admission was so quiet, so vulnerable that Isaac felt something twist in his chest. "That sounds lonely." "It is," Lyra admitted, "but it is also safe. Loneliness is better than hatred." Isaac wanted to argue with that, to say that she deserved more than just safety and solitude. But he did not know if he had the right to say such things, so he stayed silent. That afternoon, Lyra showed him how she managed her food supplies. She had a small root cellar dug into the ground beneath the cabin, access through a trapdoor in the floor. It was well stocked with preserved vegetables, dried meat, and other supplies. She also had several traps she maintained in the woods, which provided her with fresh meat when the weather allowed. "You are very self-sufficient," Isaac observed. "Most people could not survive out here alone." "I do what I must," Lyra said simply. "No one else is going to take care of me." Isaac helped her reorganize some of the supplies, and as they worked side by side in the cramped space of the cellar, he became acutely aware of her presence. The warmth of her body in the cold space, the sound of her breathing, the brush of her arm against his as they reached for the same jar. When they climbed back up into the main cabin, Isaac's heart was beating faster than the physical exertion warranted. That evening, as they prepared dinner together, Isaac found himself telling Lyra about his life before the war. About growing up on his family's farm, about his parents and his sister, about the simple rhythms of that life. He had not talked about these things to anyone since returning from the war, and it felt both painful and oddly cathartic to speak them aloud. Lyra listened without interrupting, stirring the pot and occasionally adding ingredients as he talked. When he finished, she was quiet for a moment. Then she said, "You miss it, that life." "I do," Isaac admitted, "but it is gone now. I cannot go back to it. So I have to find something new to move forward to." "And have you?" Lyra asked, glancing at him. "Found something new?" Isaac met her eyes and something passed between them, something warm and electric and utterly unexpected. "I think I might be starting to," he said quietly. Lyra looked away quickly, but not before Isaac saw the color rise in her cheeks, a darker green suffusing her skin. She turned her attention back to the cooking pot with deliberate focus. They ate dinner in a silence that was charged with unspoken things. And that night, Isaac lay awake for a long time, listening to the storm and thinking about the orc woman sleeping just a few feet away. The fourth day dawned clearer. The wind had finally died down, and though snow was still falling, it was gentle now, drifting down in soft flakes rather than driving horizontally through the air. Isaac stood at the window and looked out at a world transformed into a pristine white landscape, beautiful and deadly in equal measure. "It is ending," Lyra said from behind him. "By tomorrow the storm will be over." Isaac turned to look at her. She was standing by the fire, her arms crossed over her chest, and there was something in her expression he could not quite read. "That is good," he said, though he found he did not feel as relieved as he should have. "You will have your home back to yourself." "Yes," Lyra said, but she did not sound particularly happy about it either. They went through the day's routines together, bringing in wood, preparing meals, tending to small tasks around the cabin. But there was a new tension between them now, born not of hostility but of something else. Something neither of them seemed willing to name. In the afternoon, Isaac finally worked up the courage to ask the question that had been on his mind. "Lyra, do you ever think about leaving here, going somewhere where you would not have to be alone?" Lyra looked at him sharply. "Where would I go? Humans hate me for being an orc. Orcs hate me for refusing to hate humans. There is nowhere I belong." "That is not true," Isaac said. "There are places in the West, frontier settlements where people are too busy surviving to worry about old hatreds, where an orc who wanted to live peacefully might be able to find acceptance." "You do not know that," Lyra said, but there was a hint of longing in her voice. "No, I do not," Isaac admitted. "But I know that living out here alone for the rest of your life is not really living. It is just surviving, and you deserve more than that." Lyra's expression was conflicted, hope and doubt warring in her eyes. "Why do you care what happens to me?" It was the question Isaac had been avoiding, but he found he could no longer hide from the answer. "Because in the past few days, I have come to know you. And I have realized that you are kind and strong and good, and I think you might be the best person I have met in a very long time." Lyra stared at him, her eyes wide. "Isaac, I am not asking you for anything," Isaac said quickly. "I just wanted you to know that you matter. That you should not spend the rest of your life hiding away from the world." Lyra turned away from him, her shoulders tense. For a long moment she did not speak. Then, in a voice so quiet he almost did not hear it, she said, "I have spent 2 years telling myself that I was content here, that I did not need anyone else. But these past few days, having someone to talk to work with, to share meals with, I have remembered what it feels like to not be alone, and I do not know if I can go back to the way things were." Isaac's heart was pounding. He took a step closer to her, careful not to crowd her. "Then do not." Lyra turned to face him, and there were tears shining in her yellow eyes. "What are you saying?" "I am saying that when the storm ends and I leave here, you could come with me." The words tumbled out of Isaac in a rush. "I am heading west anyway, looking for a place to start over. We could travel together, watch each other's backs, and when we find a place that seems right, we could see what happens." "You do not know what you are asking," Lyra said, shaking her head. "People will not accept us. A human and an orc traveling together, they will think the worst." "Let them think what they want," Isaac said fiercely. "I am tired of letting other people's hatred dictate my life. Aren't you?" Lyra looked at him, and he could see the war happening inside her. Fear and hope, caution and longing, all battling for dominance. "I am afraid," she whispered. "I have been hurt so many times, rejected by my own people. If I let myself hope for this and it goes wrong." Isaac reached out slowly, giving her every chance to pull away, and took her hand. Her skin was warm and rough, her hand larger than his and strong. She did not pull away. "I am afraid too," he said. "I have lost everything I thought I knew. I have no idea what the future holds. But I know that I do not want to walk away from you and spend the rest of my life wondering what might have been." Lyra's fingers tightened around his. "You are either very brave or very foolish." "Probably both," Isaac admitted, and was rewarded by a small, genuine smile. They stood there for a long moment, hands clasped, the fire crackling beside them and the snow falling gently outside. Then Lyra took a deep breath and nodded. "All right," she said. "When the storm ends, I will go with you. We will try this. Together." Isaac felt a surge of emotion so powerful it almost overwhelmed him. Relief and joy and something else, something deeper and more profound. He squeezed her hand and smiled. Together. That night they sat by the fire later than usual, talking about plans and possibilities. Lyra told Isaac about her skills, the things she could do. She was an excellent hunter and tracker, skilled with a bow and with traps. She knew how to cure hides, preserve meat, and identify edible and medicinal plants. Isaac talked about his farming knowledge, his experience with carpentry and basic smithing, the things he had learned during the war about organization and logistics. "We make a good team," Lyra observed. "Between your skills and mine, we could manage well enough." "More than well enough," Isaac said. "We could build something good, something that lasts." Lyra looked at him, and in her eyes he saw the same hope he felt rising in his own chest. It was terrifying and exhilarating in equal measure. When they finally went to their respective sleeping areas that night, Isaac lay awake thinking about the future for the first time in months. A future that did not look bleak and empty, but full of possibility. A future he would not have to face alone. The fifth day dawned clear and cold. The storm had passed completely, leaving behind a world of crystalline white. The sun was shining, making the snow sparkle like a field of diamonds. It was breathtakingly beautiful and also a clear sign that it was time for Isaac to leave. Except now, he would not be leaving alone. They spent the morning preparing for the journey. Lyra packed her essential belongings, her bow and arrows, her hunting knives, warm clothes, preserved food, and a few personal items. She moved through the cabin with purpose, but Isaac could see the emotion in the careful way she touched things, saying silent goodbyes to the home that had sheltered her for 2 years. "Are you sure about this?" Isaac asked as he helped her bundle her possessions. Lyra paused and looked around the cabin one last time. "I am sure that I cannot stay here anymore, not after having company again, not after remembering what it is like to have hope for something beyond mere survival." She looked at him, and her expression was resolute. "I am sure that I want to see what lies beyond this forest, and I am sure that I want to find out if what I am feeling right now is real." "What are you feeling?" Isaac asked quietly. Lyra held his gaze, her yellow eyes intense. "Like maybe I have found something I did not know I was looking for." Isaac felt his breath catch. He reached out and took her hand again, marveling at how natural it felt now. "I feel the same way." They finished packing in silence, but it was a comfortable silence, full of shared purpose. When everything was ready, Lyra took one last look around the cabin. Then she stepped outside and Isaac followed, closing the door behind them. The snow was deep, coming up past their knees in places, but they had good boots and the sun was warm on their faces. They set off through the forest, following the path Isaac had taken when he arrived, now barely visible under the blanket of white. Traveling through the deep snow was exhausting work. They took turns breaking trail, one of them forging ahead while the other followed in their footsteps. Despite the difficulty, Isaac found himself feeling almost lighthearted. Lyra walked beside him, steady and strong, and the knowledge that they were in this together made all the difference. As the day wore on, they talked about their plans. Isaac told her about the settlements he had heard of in the West, places where the wilderness was being slowly tamed and newcomers were welcome if they were willing to work hard. Lyra told him about the things she wanted to try, the things she had never been able to do while living in isolation. "I want to see a human market," she said at one point. "I want to see all the different goods people trade, hear all the different languages and accents. I have heard that markets are crowded and noisy and overwhelming, and I want to experience that." "They are all those things," Isaac confirmed. "But they can also be exciting, full of possibility." "That is what I want," Lyra said. "Possibility." As the sun began to set, they found a sheltered spot beneath a rocky overhang and made camp for the night. They built a fire, ate some of the provisions Lyra had packed, and huddled close to the flames for warmth. The temperature was dropping rapidly now that the sun was down, and even their heavy coats were barely enough. "Come closer," Lyra said, her breath fogging in the cold air. "We should share body heat." Isaac moved closer, and Lyra wrapped one of their blankets around both of them. He could feel the warmth of her body against his side, solid and reassuring. His heart was beating faster again, but not from fear or cold. "Is this all right?" he asked. "It is necessary," Lyra said, but there was a softness in her voice that suggested it was more than just practical. They sat in silence for a while, watching the fire and the stars beginning to emerge in the darkening sky. Then Lyra spoke, her voice thoughtful. "When I was young, before the war, I used to dream about seeing the world, going on adventures. My clan thought it was foolish. They said an orc's place was with their clan, protecting their territory, raising the next generation. But I always wanted more." "And now you are getting it," Isaac said. "Even if it is not quite the way you imagined." "No," Lyra agreed. "I never imagined I would be traveling with a human. I never imagined a human would see me as anything other than a monster." She turned to look at him, and in the firelight her features were softened, the sharp angles of her face less severe. "But you do not see me that way, do you?" "No," Isaac said simply. "I see you, Lyra Longtusk, a woman who has been hurt and rejected but who still chose compassion over hatred. A woman who is brave enough to take a chance on something new, even though it terrifies her. A woman who is—" He paused, then finished quietly, "a woman who is extraordinary." Lyra's eyes glistened with unshed tears. "I see you too, Isaac Hendrick. A man who has been through war and loss, but who still has kindness in him. A man who judges others by their actions rather than their race. A man who makes me believe that maybe the world is not entirely full of darkness after all." Isaac reached up and very gently touched her face. His fingers traced the line of her jaw, feeling the smoothness of her skin, the curve of her small tusks. Lyra's eyes closed and she leaned into his touch. "May I kiss you?" Isaac asked, his voice barely above a whisper. Lyra's eyes opened, and in them Isaac saw wonder and desire and a vulnerability that made his heart ache. "Yes," she breathed. "Yes." Isaac leaned in slowly, giving her every chance to change her mind. But Lyra met him halfway, and when their lips touched, it felt like something inside Isaac clicked into place. The kiss was gentle and tentative at first, both of them learning the shape of each other. Then Lyra's hand came up to the back of his head, her fingers threading through his hair, and the kiss deepened. When they finally pulled apart, Both of them were breathing hard. Lyra rested her forehead against Isaac's, and he could feel her smiling. "I have never kissed anyone before," she admitted. "I did not know it would feel like that." "Like what?" Isaac asked. "Like coming home," Lyra said softly. "Like finding something I did not know I was missing." Isaac wrapped his arms around her, and they held each other close as the fire burned down and the stars wheeled overhead. For the first time in a very long time, Isaac felt at peace. And from the way Lyra was holding him, solid and sure, he thought she might feel the same. They traveled for nearly 2 weeks, making their way steadily westward through the winter landscape. The going was slow, with the deep snow and the need to hunt for food along the way, but Isaac found he did not mind. Every day with Lyra was a revelation, a deepening of the connection they had begun in the cabin. They fell into easy rhythms together. Lyra was the better hunter, so she took the lead in tracking and bringing down game. Isaac was better at preparing and preserving the meat, at finding sheltered spots to camp and building efficient fires. They complemented each other in ways that felt natural and right. At night, they would lie close together under their blankets, talking about everything and nothing. Lyra told him stories of her childhood in the Orc clan, about her family and the traditions she had grown up with. Isaac told her about the war, about the things he had seen and done that still haunted him. They shared their fears and their hopes, their regrets and their dreams. And they kissed, learning the taste and feel of each other, exploring this new intimacy with a mixture of eagerness and tenderness. Every touch felt precious, every moment together a gift. One evening, about 10 days into their journey, they crested a hill and saw smoke rising in the distance. As they drew closer, they realized it was coming from a small settlement, a handful of buildings clustered together, with fields stretching out around them and a wooden palisade for protection. "Should we go around?" Lyra asked, her voice tense. "I do not know how they will react to me." Isaac squeezed her hand. "We need supplies, and we need to know if this is the kind of place where we could settle or if we need to keep looking. But I will not let anyone hurt you, I promise." Lyra nodded, though Isaac could see the fear in her eyes. They approached the settlement together, walking openly along the main path so as not to seem like they were sneaking up. They were spotted by a lookout when they were still several hundred yards away. A man called down from a watchtower, asking their business. Isaac called back that they were travelers seeking to trade for supplies. There was a long pause. Then the man called down, "Is that an orc with you?" "Yes," Isaac called back, his voice firm. "Her name is Lyra. She is with me. We mean no harm." Another pause. Then the gates opened and a group of men emerged. They were armed, carrying spears and bows, and they looked wary. But they did not immediately attack, which Isaac took as a good sign. The leader of the group was an older man with gray hair and a weathered face. He looked Isaac and Lyra over with sharp eyes, then said, "We do not usually allow orcs here. We have had trouble with raiding parties." "Lyra is not a raider," Isaac said firmly. "She is my companion. We are traveling together looking for a place to settle. She is a skilled hunter and tracker. I have experience with farming and carpentry. We are willing to work and trade fairly." The man studied them for a long moment, his gaze moving between their faces and then down to their joined hands. Isaac had not even realized he and Lyra were still holding hands, but he did not let go now. Finally, the man said, "My name is Thomas Winters. I am the leader of this settlement. You can come in, but the orc will need to leave her weapons with us while you are here, and you will both be watched. Any trouble and you are out." "Understood." "Understood," Isaac said. He looked at Lyra, who nodded reluctantly and began unbuckling her bow and quiver. They were allowed into the settlement. though they drew stares and whispers from everyone they passed. Isaac kept close to Lyra, making it clear with his body language that anyone who wanted to threaten her would have to go through him first. Thomas Winters led them to his home and invited them to sit at his table. His wife, a stout woman with kind eyes, brought them hot tea and bread. As they ate, Thomas asked questions about where they had come from and where they were going. Isaac told him an abbreviated version of their story, leaving out some of the more personal details but being honest about the essentials. Thomas listened without interrupting, his expression thoughtful. When Isaac finished, Thomas was quiet for a moment. Then he said, "I will be honest with you. Most of the people here will not be happy about having an orc in the settlement. We have lost people to orc raids. The wounds are still fresh." Lyra spoke up then, her voice steady despite the tension Isaac could feel in her body. "I understand. I have also lost people to violence between our races. My entire clan cast me out because I refused to participate in more killing. I do not want to cause trouble. If you will allow us to trade for supplies, we will leave and continue on our way." Thomas studied her for a long moment. Then he looked at his wife and some silent communication passed between them. She nodded. "You can stay the night," Thomas said. "In the morning we will hold a gathering. The settlement will decide whether you can trade here or if you need to move on. That is the fairest I can offer." "That is more than fair," Isaac said. "Thank you." They were given a small room in one of the communal buildings, and after the door closed behind them, Lyra sat down heavily on one of the beds. "That was difficult," she said quietly. "The way they looked at me, like I was something dangerous that might turn on them at any moment." Isaac sat beside her and put his arm around her shoulders. "I know, I am sorry, but you were amazing. You spoke up for yourself, stood your ground. I was proud of you." Lyra leaned into him, resting her head on his shoulder. "I do not know if I can do this, Isaac. Living among people who fear and hate me, it might be too hard." "Then we will keep looking," Isaac said firmly. "There are other settlements, other places. We will find somewhere that feels right, and if we do not, then we will find a piece of land and build our own home. Just the two of us, if that is what it takes." Lyra turned to look at him, her eyes searching his face. "You would do that, give up living in a community just for me?" "In a heartbeat," Isaac said. "Lyra, you have to understand something. These past few weeks, traveling with you, getting to know you, falling in love with you, it has been the best time of my life. I do not want to go back to being alone. I do not want to be without you. So yes, I would absolutely give up living in a community if it meant I could be with you." Lyra's breath caught. "You love me." Isaac realized what he had just said and his heart began to race, but it was true and there was no point in hiding it. "Yes, I love you. I think I started falling for you that first day when you let a strange human into your home in the middle of a blizzard. And every day since then I have fallen a little more." Tears were streaming down Lyra's face now, but she was smiling. "I love you too. I was afraid to say it, afraid to even think it. But I love you, Isaac Hendrick. You make me want to be brave. You make me believe that maybe I deserve good things after all." They kissed then, long and deep, pouring all their emotion into the connection between them. When they finally pulled apart, both of them were smiling through their tears. "Whatever happens tomorrow," Lyra said, "we face it together." "Yes, yes," Isaac agreed, "always together." The next morning they were awakened early and brought to the center of the settlement where a large group had gathered. It seemed like the entire population had turned out, men and women and children, all of them looking at Lyra with expressions ranging from curiosity to outright hostility. Thomas Winters stood at the front and explained the situation. He told the gathered people about Isaac and Lyra, about their request to trade and possibly settle in the area. Then he opened the floor for discussion. The responses were mixed. Some people spoke out vehemently against allowing an orc anywhere near the settlement. They talked about lost loved ones, destroyed homes, and the danger of trusting the enemy. Isaac felt Lyra flinch beside him with every angry word, and he held her hand tighter, but others spoke up in their defense. A young woman pointed out that the war was over, and continuing to hate all orcs meant the killing would never stop. An old farmer said that if the orc woman had skills that could benefit the community, it would be foolish to turn her away out of pure prejudice. Thomas Winters himself spoke about the importance of judging individuals by their actions rather than their race. The debate went on for over an hour, voices rising and falling in argument and counterargument. Finally, Thomas called for a vote. Those in favor of allowing Isaac and Lyra to trade and potentially settle in the area should raise their hands. Isaac held his breath as hands slowly began to rise. It was not everyone, not even a majority at first. But more and more people raised their hands until finally Thomas counted them and nodded. "It is decided," he said. "You may trade here, and if you wish to settle in the area, you may do so with the understanding that you will be watched closely. Any sign of trouble and the decision will be reconsidered. Do you accept these terms?" Isaac looked at Lyra. She looked back at him, and in her eyes he saw both fear and hope. Then she nodded. "We accept," Isaac said, "and thank you. We will prove ourselves worthy of your trust." The crowd dispersed slowly, some people still grumbling, others looking thoughtful. But the decision had been made. They had a chance. Over the next few days, Isaac and Lyra traded for supplies and talked to Thomas Winters about available land. He showed them a piece of property about a mile from the settlement, near a stream and with good soil. It was unclaimed, and if they were willing to work it, they could have it. Isaac and Lyra walked the land together, imagining what they could build there. A cabin, larger than Lyra's old one. A barn for animals, fields for crops, a life they would create together. "It is perfect," Lyra said, looking out over the snow-covered field. "I can see it, our home." "Our home," Isaac echoed, and the words felt right in a way nothing had felt right in a long time. They spent the rest of the winter preparing. The settlement allowed them to stay in one of the guest houses while they worked on clearing the land and gathering materials. It was hard work, made harder by the cold and the snow, but Isaac had never been happier. Some of the settlement members began to warm to them. A few men helped Isaac fell trees and drag them to the building site. A woman taught Lyra some human cooking techniques and shared recipes. Children, less bound by adult prejudices, were fascinated by Lyra and would ask her endless questions about orcs and her tusks and her life in the mountains. There were still those who remained hostile, who muttered darkly when Isaac and Lyra passed by or made rude gestures when they thought no one was looking. But for every person who rejected them, there was another who slowly began to accept them. It was not perfect, but it was progress. As the winter began to give way to early spring, the snow started to melt. The world turned from white to brown, and then, gradually, to green as the first shoots of new growth pushed up through the thawing earth. Isaac and Lyra worked from dawn to dusk, building their cabin log by log, board by board. One evening in early spring, as they sat outside their partially completed cabin watching the sunset, Isaac turned to Lyra and said, "I want to ask you something." Lyra looked at him, curious. "What is it?" Isaac took her hand, his heart pounding. "I know we come from different worlds. I know that what we have is complicated and that the road ahead will not be easy. But these past few months with you have been the best of my life, and I cannot imagine my future without you in it." He took a breath, then continued. "Lyra Longtusk, will you marry me? Will you be my wife and let me be your husband and build this life with me for as long as we both live?" Lyra's eyes went wide and tears began to stream down her face. "Isaac, are you sure? A marriage between a human and an orc. I do not even know if it is legal." "I do not care," Isaac said firmly. "Legal or not, I want to commit myself to you. I want to stand before whatever gods will listen and promise to love you and stand beside you for the rest of my days. So what do you say? Will you marry me?" Lyra was crying in earnest now, but she was also smiling. "Yes," she said. "Yes, I will marry you. I want nothing more than to spend my life with you." They kissed as the sun set behind them, painting the sky in shades of orange and pink and gold. And when they pulled apart, both of them were laughing and crying at the same time, overwhelmed by joy and relief and love. The wedding took place a month later, in the late spring when the world was in full bloom. Thomas Winters agreed to officiate, standing before the small gathering as Isaac and Lyra exchanged vows. Not everyone from the settlement attended. Some still could not accept the union between human and orc. But those who did come were genuinely happy for them. The young woman who had spoken in their defense at the first gathering brought flowers. The old farmer brought a jug of his best cider. Children ran around laughing, treating the wedding like any other celebration. Lyra wore a simple dress that some of the settlement women had helped her make, dyed a soft green that complemented her skin. Isaac wore his best clothes, cleaned and mended. They stood facing each other, hands clasped, as Thomas spoke about love and commitment and the courage it took to build something new. When it came time for their vows, Isaac spoke first. "Lyra, from the moment I stumbled into your cabin during that blizzard, you have been my salvation. You taught me that the world is bigger and more complicated than I thought. You taught me that love is stronger than hatred, and that courage means choosing hope even when hope seems impossible. I promise to stand beside you, to protect you, to cherish you, and to build a life with you that honors both of our peoples. I love you, and I always will." Lyra's voice was thick with emotion as she spoke her own vows. "Isaac, you came into my life when I had given up on connection, on hope, on the possibility of being loved. You saw past what I am to who I am. You made me believe that I am worthy of good things, of happiness, of love. I promise to be your partner in all things, to face whatever comes with courage, and to love you with all that I am. You are my home, and wherever you are, that is where I belong." Thomas pronounced them married, and they sealed their vows with a kiss that drew cheers and applause from the gathered witnesses. As the sun shone down on them and the spring breeze carried the scent of flowers, Isaac and Lyra began their new life together as husband and wife. The cabin was finished by midsummer. It was a good, solid structure with a main room, a separate bedroom, and a loft for storage. They had a hearth that drew well, windows that let in plenty of light, and a door that fit snugly in its frame. Behind the cabin, they had built a small barn and had acquired a few chickens and a goat from the settlement. The fields they had planted were growing well. Isaac's farming knowledge, combined with Lyra's understanding of the local ecosystem, produced healthy crops. They worked side by side every day, and in the evenings, they would sit on the porch they had built and watch the sun go down over their land. One such evening, as they sat together with Isaac's arm around Lyra's shoulders, she said, "Do you remember that day you arrived at my cabin? During the blizzard?" "Of course I do," Isaac said. "I was certain I was going to freeze to death. And then you opened the door and I thought I might be killed by an orc instead. I did not know which would be worse." Lyra laughed. "And I thought you would kill me in my sleep or run away and bring back others to drive me out. I almost did not let you in." "But you did," Isaac said, squeezing her gently. You took a chance on a stranger, even though you had every reason not to. And you stayed, Lyra said softly. You saw me, really saw me, and you stayed. They sat in comfortable silence for a while, watching the colors change in the sky. Then Lyra spoke again. I am happy, Isaac, happier than I ever thought I could be, and it is because of you. I am happy too, Isaac said, and it is because of you. Because you are brave and kind and strong, because you make every day an adventure, because loving you is the easiest and the best thing I have ever done. Lyra turned in his arms and kissed him, slow and sweet. When she pulled back, she was smiling. We should go inside. It is getting dark and we have work to do tomorrow. We always have work to do, Isaac said with a laugh. But all right, let us go inside, together. They stood and walked hand in hand into their cabin, closing the door behind them on the warm summer evening. By the time autumn arrived, Isaac and Lyra had become a familiar sight in the settlement. They came to trade their surplus crops and the furs Lyra caught during her hunts. They attended gatherings and celebrations. Slowly but surely, they were becoming part of the community. It was not always easy. There were still people who refused to accept Lyra, who would not speak to her or trade with her directly. There were children who were taught to fear orcs and who would run away when they saw her coming. And there were moments when the weight of prejudice and suspicion became almost too much to bear. But there were also victories. The woman who had taught Lyra to cook became a genuine friend, visiting their cabin regularly and sharing gossip from the settlement. The old farmer asked Lyra's advice on controlling pests in his fields, and her suggestions worked so well that he publicly praised her at the next community gathering. A young couple who were expecting their first child asked Isaac and Lyra to be godparents, a gesture of trust and acceptance that brought tears to Lyra's eyes. One day in late autumn, as they were preparing to harvest the last of their crops, a group of riders approached their land. Isaac and Lyra watched them come, tense and wary. But as they drew closer, Isaac recognized Thomas Winters at the head of the group. Thomas dismounted and greeted them warmly. Isaac, Lyra, I have come with a proposal. What kind of proposal? Isaac asked cautiously. Thomas gestured to the men with him. We have been discussing the possibility of expanding our settlement. There is good land to the north, near the foothills, but it is wild country. We would need scouts to survey it, to determine if it is safe and suitable for farming, and we thought of you too. Lyra's eyes widened. You want us to scout for the settlement? You have the skills we need, Thomas said. Lyra, you are the best tracker and hunter in the area. Isaac, you have a good eye for land and farming potential, and you have both proven yourselves to be trustworthy and hard-working. What do you say? Isaac looked at Lyra, and he could see the mixture of pride and disbelief in her eyes. To be asked to scout for the settlement was a sign of respect, of trust. It meant they were no longer outsiders to be tolerated but valued members of the community. We would be honored, Lyra said, her voice thick with emotion. When do you want us to start? They spent the next 2 weeks scouting the northern territories. It was challenging work, requiring long days of travel through rough terrain. But Isaac and Lyra worked together seamlessly, their skills complementing each other perfectly. They mapped out potential settlement sites, identified water sources, and assessed the local wildlife and vegetation. When they returned to the settlement with their findings, Thomas and the others were impressed. The information Isaac and Lyra provided would be invaluable for planning the expansion. You have done excellent work, Thomas said, looking over their maps and notes. The Settlement Council wants to offer you a permanent position as scouts and guides. It would mean regular work and fair pay. Are you interested? Isaac and Lyra exchanged glances. This was more than they had ever hoped for. Not just acceptance, but a respected role in the community. "Yes," Isaac said, "we are very interested." That winter was the warmest Isaac had ever experienced, though the snow was just as deep and the temperatures just as cold as any other year. But inside their cabin, with Lyra beside him, Isaac felt wrapped in contentment and joy. They spent the long winter evenings by the fire, talking and laughing and planning for the future. Lyra was teaching Isaac the orc language, and he was teaching her to read and write in the human script. They played simple games, told stories, and sometimes just sat in comfortable silence, happy to be together. One night, as they lay in bed with the wind howling outside, Lyra said, "Isaac, you ever regret it, choosing this life? You could have settled in a human community, found a human wife, lived a normal life." Isaac rolled over to face her, his hand coming up to cup her cheek. "This is a normal life, our normal, and I have never regretted it for a single moment. You are the best thing that has ever happened to me, Lyra. You are my partner, my wife, my love. I would not trade what we have for anything." Lyra's eyes glistened with tears. "I love you so much. Sometimes I still cannot believe this is real, that I am allowed to be this happy." "It is real," Isaac assured her, "and you are allowed to be happy. We both are. We have earned it." They held each other close as the storm raged outside, safe and warm in the home they had built together. When spring returned, it brought with it new opportunities and new challenges. The settlement began its expansion project, and Isaac and Lyra were heavily involved in guiding the families who wanted to claim land in the Northern Territories. They helped people find good sites, advised them on building and farming, and continued to scout the surrounding areas. Their reputation grew, and with it came more acceptance. People who had once been suspicious or hostile began to treat them with respect. The children of the settlement no longer ran from Lyra in fear, but waved to her when they saw her coming. She had become a familiar and trusted figure. One warm spring day, as Isaac and Lyra were returning from a scouting expedition, they saw a group of orc travelers on the road ahead. Isaac felt Lyra tense beside him, and he reached over to take her hand. As they drew closer, one of the orcs stepped forward. He was large and scarred, with a stern face and the bearing of a warrior, but when he saw Lyra, his expression softened. "Lyra Longtusk," he said, "I thought I might find you in these lands." "Garth," Lyra said, her voice carefully neutral, "what brings you here?" The orc Garth glanced at Isaac, then back to Lyra. "I have come from the Longtusk clan. There have been changes. The old chief has died and a new leader has taken his place. She wants to reach out to those who were exiled, to offer reconciliation." Lyra's hand tightened on Isaac's. "Why now?" "Because the new chief is your sister," Garth said. "Mora has become the leader of the Longtusk clan, and she wants you to come home." The words hung in the air between them. Isaac felt a sudden chill despite the warm spring sun. Lyra's sister wanted her back. Her clan wanted her back. Everything they had built here, everything they had fought for, could be threatened by this offer. But when Lyra spoke, her voice was firm and clear. "This is my home now. These people, this land, and this man beside me, that is my family. I am honored that Mora reached out, and I hope that in time we can rebuild our relationship. But I will not leave the life I have built here." Garth studied her for a long moment, then nodded slowly. "I will tell Mora what you have said. But know that you will always be welcome if you change your mind. The Longtusk clan does not forget its children." "Tell Mora I love her," Lyra said, her voice soft now. "And that I forgive her for the exile. Tell her I am happy, and that I have found a life worth living. Tell her that maybe, someday, we can see each other again." Garth bowed his head in acknowledgement. Then he and his companions continued on their way, disappearing down the road. Isaac pulled Lyra into his arms, holding her tight. Are you all right? Yes, Lyra said, and she sounded surprised. I thought I would be upset or tempted or at least conflicted, but I am not. This is where I belong, with you. Always with me, Isaac said, kissing the top of her head. Always together. They walked hand in hand back to their cabin, the spring sunshine warm on their faces and the sound of birdsong filling the air. Behind them, the road stretched away toward the mountains where Lyra's old clan lived. Ahead of them, their land waited, green and growing and full of promise. That evening they sat on their porch and watched the sun set, just as they had done countless times before. But this time felt different. This time they were not just enjoying the evening together. They were celebrating a choice made, a commitment reaffirmed, a future secured. Do you remember, Isaac said, when we walked out of your cabin after the blizzard, how terrified and uncertain we both were? I remember, Lyra said. I was sure we would not make it a week, that something would happen to drive us apart or that we would realize we had made a terrible mistake. And now here we are, Isaac said, a year and a half later, married, respected members of a community, building a life that feels like something worth having. Lyra leaned her head on his shoulder. We walked out of that cabin hand in hand, even though we did not know what the future would bring. And we are still hand in hand. I think that says everything about who we are. We are stubborn, Isaac said with a laugh. We are brave, Lyra corrected. We are brave enough to love each other despite everything that should have kept us apart. We are brave enough to build something new instead of clinging to the old hatreds. We are brave enough to believe that we deserve happiness. Isaac kissed her temple. You are right, we are brave, and we are together, and that is all that matters. As the stars began to emerge in the darkening sky, they remained on their porch, hands clasped, hearts full. They had started their journey in a blizzard, two strangers trapped together by circumstance and necessity. They had ended it in spring, walking hand in hand into a future they had created together through love and courage and unwavering commitment. The world was still not perfect. There would always be people who could not accept their union, who saw their love as wrong or dangerous. There would be hard times ahead, challenges to face, obstacles to overcome. But they would face them together as they had faced everything else. Side by side, hand in hand, two hearts beating as one in the years that followed, Isaac and Lyra became something of a legend in the region. Their story was told around campfires and in taverns, a tale of love transcending hatred, of courage overcoming fear, of two people who refused to let the world dictate who they could love or how they should live. They had 3 children, each one a unique blend of human and orc heritage. They raised them to be proud of both sides of their bloodline, to stand up against injustice, and to judge people by their character rather than their appearance. Their children grew up surrounded by love, in a community that had learned to value diversity and acceptance. Isaac and Lyra continued to work as scouts for the settlement, their skills and knowledge making them invaluable to the growing community. They also served as mediators when conflicts arose between humans and orcs, using their unique perspective to help both sides understand each other better. And through it all, through the good times and the hard times, the joys and the sorrows, they remained what they had always been since that day they walked out of the cabin together, partners, lovers, friends. Hand in hand, heart to heart, building a life that proved love could indeed conquer all. When they were old and gray, sitting on the same porch they had built so many years ago, surrounded by children and grandchildren of both human and orc descent, they would look at each other and remember. They would remember the blizzard that had brought them together. They would remember the fear and uncertainty of those first days. They would remember the moment they had chosen to walk into an unknown future together, and they would smile, because they had been right. They had been brave, and they had built something beautiful. The story of Isaac Hendrick and Lyra Longtusk became a testament to the power of love, the importance of courage, and the possibility of change. It reminded people that the lines they drew between us and them were often arbitrary and meaningless, that the heart knew no boundaries of race or species. That family was not defined by blood, but by choice and commitment. And most importantly, it proved that sometimes the most unexpected encounters could lead to the most extraordinary journeys. That a blizzard that snowed a man in with a quiet orc stranger could result in two people walking out hand in hand, ready to face the world together. It was a story of hope in the face of hatred, of love conquering fear, of two lonely souls finding in each other the home they had been searching for all along. And as the years passed and the story was told and retold, it inspired countless others to look beyond their prejudices, to take chances on unexpected connections, and to believe that love in all its forms was worth fighting for. Isaac and Lyra's legacy lived on long after they were gone, a shining example of what the world could be if people chose compassion over hatred, understanding over fear, and love over everything else. They had started as strangers, brought together by a storm. They had become friends, then partners, then lovers, then spouses. And in the end, they had become something even greater, a symbol of hope and possibility in a world that desperately needed both. Their story ended as it had begun, with two people holding hands and facing the future together. But this time, the future was not uncertain and frightening. It was warm and welcoming, filled with family and community and love. They had walked through the blizzard and emerged on the other side, not just surviving but thriving. And when the end finally came for them, many years later, they faced that too together. Isaac passed first on a quiet autumn evening with Lyra holding his hand. His last words were, "Thank you for saying yes. Thank you for choosing me. Thank you for the most wonderful life I could have imagined." Lyra held him close, tears streaming down her face, and whispered, "Thank you for seeing me, for loving me, for giving me a reason to believe in happiness. I will carry you in my heart until we meet again." When Lyra passed, a few years later, surrounded by their children and grandchildren, her last words were about Isaac. "He is waiting for me," she said with a smile. "I can feel him. We are going to walk hand in hand again, just like we did that spring morning when we left the cabin together. Just like we have done every day since, hand in hand always." And in the community they had helped to build, the story of Isaac and Lyra continued to be told. Parents told it to children. Teachers told it to students. Elders told it to anyone who would listen. It became a foundational myth of the settlement, a story that defined their values and their vision for what society could be. The cabin where they had first sheltered together was long gone, buried under snow and time. But the cabin they had built together still stood, maintained by their descendants as a memorial and a meeting place. People would come from miles around to see it, to stand on the porch where Isaac and Lyra had sat so many evenings, to touch the walls they had raised with their own hands. And in the spring, when the snow melted and the world turned green again, young couples would come to that cabin and make promises to each other. Promises to be brave, to choose love over fear, to build something beautiful together no matter what obstacles they faced. They would hold hands and walk away from the cabin together, just as Isaac and Lyra had done so long ago, carrying with them the hope that their love, too, could change the world. The blizzard that had brought Isaac to Lyra's door had been fierce and dangerous, a force of nature that could have easily killed him. But it had also been a gift, a twist of fate that had brought two lonely souls together and given them the chance to find in each other everything they had been missing. Sometimes the greatest love stories begin in the most unlikely circumstances. Sometimes the people we are meant to spend our lives with come into our orbit in ways we could never predict. And sometimes the courage to take a chance on someone different, someone unexpected, someone the world tells us we should fear or hate, can lead to the most profound and beautiful connection we will ever experience. That was the lesson of Isaac and Lyra. That was the legacy they left behind. And that was the story that would be told for generations to come, inspiring people to be braver, kinder, and more open to the possibilities of love. A blizzard had snowed him in with a quiet orc stranger. By spring, they had walked out hand in hand. And in the space between those two moments, they had found everything that mattered: love, partnership, home, and hope for a better future. It was a story worth telling, a story worth remembering, a story that proved beyond any doubt that love could indeed conquer all. And so the story ends, as all good stories do, with happiness and fulfillment and the promise of a legacy that will endure. Isaac and Lyra had faced the blizzard together and emerged victorious. They had built a life that honored both their peoples and paved the way for a more accepting world. They had loved each other with a fierce and unwavering devotion that transcended every obstacle placed in their path. They had been brave. They had been strong. They had been true to themselves and to each other. And in the end, that had made all the difference. The blizzard was long past. The spring had come and gone many times over. But the love between Isaac Hendrick and Lyra Longtusk remained, eternal and unchanging, a testament to the power of choosing compassion over hatred, understanding over fear, and love over everything else. Hand in hand, they had walked into the future. And hand in hand, they would remain forever and always in the hearts and memories of all those whose lives they had touched. It was a good ending, a happy ending. An ending that was really just the beginning of something beautiful that would ripple outward through time, changing lives and opening hearts for generations to come. And that, ultimately, was the greatest gift Isaac and Lyra gave to the world. The proof that love in all its forms was worth fighting for, that differences could be bridged, that prejudices could be overcome, that two people, no matter how unlikely their pairing might seem, could build something lasting and beautiful if they were willing to take a chance on each other. The blizzard had brought them together. Love had kept them together. And the life they built had shown the world what was possible when courage and compassion triumphed over fear and hatred. It was a story for the ages, a love for the ages, and a reminder that sometimes the most extraordinary journeys begin with a single act of kindness, opening a door to a stranger in a storm and choosing to see the person behind the fear. Isaac and Lyra had made that choice. They had opened their hearts to each other. And in doing so, they had changed not just their own lives, but the lives of everyone around them. It was, in every sense of the word, a love story. One that began in winter and bloomed in spring. One that started with fear and ended with joy. One that proved, beyond any shadow of doubt, that love truly could conquer all. And so they lived and loved and built a beautiful life together. Hand in hand, heart to heart, from that snowy day when a blizzard brought them together to the spring when they walked out into their new life, to all the springs that followed, year after year, until their story became legend and their love became eternal. A blizzard snowed him in with a quiet orc stranger. By spring, they walked out hand in hand, and the world was better for it.